BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started.
Follow BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. Recently on the channel, I had done an episode called the Lake Herman Road Murders Q&A, and then I did one that was the Blue Rock Springs shooting psychological profile, where it was very similar to a Q&A session where I was reading off some of your questions and comments and incorporated them into the episode. And last week I did one called the Lake Berryessa stabbing Q&A session, so I thought the only logical thing to do was complete the Zodiac Killer canonical crimes with the murder of Paul Stein Q&A session. So welcome to this one here, and yes, I'll be reading off your questions and comments, and we can go through them together. If there's anything that I say that you want to challenge, please put your idea in the comment section below, and perhaps it'll be worked into a future Q&A session, as well as the weekly AMAs on Wednesdays. On October 11th, 1969, Paul Stein was murdered by the Zodiac Killer. This is the final confirmed Zodiac Killer incident, and everything that happened after October 11th in terms of the actual crimes the Zodiac committed are all just question marks. Did the Zodiac keep killing? Paul Stein was murdered, and then a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt was mailed in multiple Zodiac correspondences to prove that they were authentic. And the questions that people really just want to know is there some greater level to the story? Because prior to the murder of Paul Stein, the Zodiac Killer isn't attacking taxi drivers. The Zodiac Killer is going after couples in lovers' lanes, or in the very least, secluded areas in the middle of nowhere, areas late at night where there's one man and one woman in the car. And that is one of the few commonalities among all of the four Zodiac canonical crimes at Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and the Paul Stein murder. There is a car involved, and even with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, it happens very, very close by to her vehicle. The person who murdered Sherry Jo Bates, well, that is an unconfirmed incident, wrote in the Riverside Confession that he had tampered with her car. While the victims were not seated in a car at Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, the Zodiac Killer did write a message on the car door, so there's also that angle. But with the Paul Stein murder, it is so different. You have a taxi driver, a single man being murdered. He picks up somebody in front of the Pinecrest Diner, and then that person asks him to drive either to Washington and Cherry Street or Washington and Maple Street, and he is murdered around Washington and Cherry Street in Presidio Heights in San Francisco. This crime is frequently referred to the murder that took place in Presidio Heights. So, what happened? I mean, how did all of this come about? Well, let's get to your questions and comments. And the first one that I would like to go to is one that was put out on the anniversary episode that was last October for the murder of Paul Stein. And this one is from Walter, who says, "Out of all the victims, I really feel bad for poor Paul. He was just trying to make a better life for himself. This case alone makes me realize what we are dealing with here. I tend to get caught up in the mystery and forget the real lives that were lost. It almost doesn't seem real until uploads like these give me a wake-up slap." It really is, though. Like, people do focus so much on trying to solve the mystery, or they want to know that they got the right suspect. But we always have to remember this humanizing element, and I really do appreciate that comment from Walter. About Paul Stein, the famous thing about him is that he worked multiple jobs and he was a student. Of course, he was a taxi driver, right? Killed on the job, nonetheless. And I believe his other job was an insurance salesman, and he was also a PhD student, as well as being married, and he seemed like a very busy individual. Drew Beeson, who hosts the show, the Zodcast, available here on YouTube on his channel, Drew Beeson, got in touch with somebody who knew Paul Stine and said that he was just the nicest guy in the world. I mean, if we can add any type of humanizing element, I think that one is important. The next question comes to us from J.A. Baldwin, and I would ask that everybody approach this comment with an open mind. J.A. Baldwin says, I had a thought, and it's far-fetched, but could Paul Stine have been the Zodiac Killer? At least at Lake Berryessa, or the first murders. Or perhaps he was working with the letter sender, and was killed by him, as in one letter it says, I was the same man responsible for those murders last fall, or something to that effect. Well, the phone call definitely says, I also killed those kids last year, if that's what you mean. And, what exactly would that be? I was the same man responsible for those murders last fall. The Zodiac did say he was the killer of the two kids last Christmas, spelled Christ Mass, at Lake Herman. Maybe that's what you're referring to. I know it sounds absurd, but just a thought. Oh, J.A. Baldwin is not the first person to say that, and that's why I wanted to read off that comment, because with the murder of Paul Stein, I mean, the sad thing is, I think people are suspicious of Paul Stein because he resembles the Zodiac Killer composite sketch. Not if you look at the photo of him with the mustache, but if you look at perhaps his 1956 prom photo, he is, there are certain similarities between Paul Stein, whether it's the hairline, and of course people are looking at the glasses, but glasses are not anatomical. I mean, not in the conventional sense anyway. But I think that the reason why people have put this theory out on the internet before is because Paul Stein resembles the composite sketch that was taken when? After the Stein shooting. I mean, certainly not. I mean, that would be one of the few things that would have actually been impossible. But if you look at this here, was Paul Stein an active participant in something? I have mentioned something about this once before on the channel, and I put this theory in the category of the craziest theory ever mentioned in the Zodiac Killer world, that Paul Stein was the Zodiac Killer, or as J.A. Baldwin says, an active participant in the murders, only because I think that well, I just don't think there's a substantial amount of evidence, but a lot of people do point out the similarity between the composite and the older photos of Paul Stein, and they're like, was he targeted because this person killed him in a self-loathing way, meaning that it wasn't an arbitrary attack, that he wanted to go after somebody who enraged him. Maybe he looked like his father, even. I mean, there's certain facial similarities between the composite and Paul Stein, and a lot of other Zodiac theorists have talked about this, but no, I don't think Paul Stein had murdered anyone. I mean, I just don't. I do not have much to say about that. When I did the episodes, though, Zodiac Killer, Merchant Marine Theory, there are two of them on this channel. The other one is just the kind of first draft, if you will. In that theory, which is put forward by someone named Cat, Paul Stein was murdered for a reason, because as a taxi driver he had given rides to the airport to people whom could have incriminated the Zodiac Killer, more or less, people who had certain knowledge of the Zodiac Killer's activities, and you can hear the full story in Zodiac Killer Merchant Marine Theory. I would say, though, if this is the craziest theory out there, that Paul Stein was the Zodiac Killer, then the second craziest one is that Brian Hartnell actually wanted to survive the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and that he was some type of active participant in the crimes that took place. I mean, there would be so it would be so much easier to go through with that without getting stabbed in the back 6 times. Or if somebody's like, hey, I'm the Zodiac Killer, do you want to help me out with something? Yeah, sure, why don't you just go ahead, tie me up, and stab me in the back 6 times? I mean, no, I don't think that there was any intention that Brian Hartnell was an active participant, and let alone why. I mean, like, for what reason would he actually get injured himself? And bear in mind, Cecilia Shepard almost survived the Lake Berryessa stabbing. She lived for 2 days in the hospital. So I think these things about how the victims were actually active participants in the crime, I do not believe them at all, if I can take a very hard stance. Although I will give credit to J.A. Baldwin here, because listen to this one more time. When he says that perhaps working with the letter sender, and then something like the letter sender betrayed him and then murdered him. Okay, that's the first time I've heard this exact variant of the theory that Paul Stein it was an active participant in the Zodiac crimes. Mostly when I was reading this stuff, it was more like Paul Stein is the Zodiac, all right, but he had himself killed in a sort of suicide pact, like an assisted suicide, and he had somebody else shoot him. I also do not believe that. It's just this is the first time that I've read a comment exactly like this from. So thank you to J.A. Baldwin all the same. Our next comment comes to us from Professor Stewart on the episode AMA Part 2 Zodiac and All Things. This is a recent one. Professor Stewart writes, if Falk did speak to the Zodiac after the Stein murder, then that certainly provides a very good reason why the Zodiac would stop killing at that point. That's about as close of a call as you can get, and the Zodiac may have decided that his luck wouldn't hold out much longer. Alright, so after the Stein murder, many people, including the profiler Sharon Hagen, simply believe that the Zodiac Killer was thinking that if I keep doing this, I'm going to get caught. And if you go through any of the episodes on this channel about serial killer psychology, you will see and hear many comments from me about predatory instincts are so strong with serial killers that it's almost like they have stronger predatory instincts than the average person. And in many cases, the biggest reason why they stop killing is they're telling themselves, if I keep doing this, I'm going to get caught. And usually there's usually a larger reign of terror or year span of activity with a serial killer. I mean, we're talking 8 years, 9 years, maybe 12, 15 years. And then, all right, if there's some odd incident in somebody's life, then they'll start killing again, maybe once or twice more. But, with the Zodiac Killer, you have less than 1 calendar year, beginning on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders, maybe, and then going on to the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 69. But many people believe that the Zodiac Killer simply thought, okay, this thrill killing is going to get me in trouble, I'm going to get arrested, I'm going to jail. I mean, then California is going back and forth about the death penalty. I'm not going to do this anymore, but I will write in the 340 cipher that I'm not afraid of the gas chamber or something like that. But I think it's a very widely held belief that the Zodiac Killer stopped killing because after the Stein shooting, he realized if he kept doing it so publicly, then he would very, very quickly get caught. And this brings us to the next thing. I'm sure if you have looked into anything to do with the Zodiac Killer mystery, you're probably curious, why would there be all these differences in the Zodiac crimes? Lake Herman Road, okay, you're sneaking up on some teenagers, killing them in a parking lot that's around a curve in the road. Okay, then with Blue Rock Springs, very similar operation. But then at Lake Berryessa, to go out in the daytime and to carry a knife and tie the victims up, having a long extended conversation and stabbing them. Next, going to a taxi driver, Paul Stein, riding in his taxi, maybe talking to him, maybe not, we're not really sure, and then murdering a taxi driver, single gunshot to the side of the head. Why all these differences? Well, some of the things that I've been learning about recently, firstly, I've been following the podcast Zodiac Speaking, hosted by Mike Morford and Richard Grinnell. If you're not listening to that one, I highly recommend it. And they even brought up some things that were, I guess you'd call these allusions. They alluded to this in the Lake Berryessa episode. The Zodiac Killer wrote a letter taking credit for both Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs at the same time. This thing that we were just saying at the beginning about how I killed the kids last Christmas at Lake Herman, and the girl on the 4th of July, confessing to 2 crimes at once. So then, the Zodiac has already put it out there that he targeted couples in cars at night. Now, to deviate from that pattern would mean that people are only looking for someone who's targeting couples in cars at night. So at Lake Berryessa, do something different, because the authorities are not going to be as suspicious of some guy going out at 6:30 p.m. on September 27th, 1969, and committing the Lake Berryessa stabbing. Now the Zodiac Killer has left a message on the car door on Brian Hartnell's Carmen Gia at Lake Berryessa. So then, well, people are going to be aware that this guy is targeting couples, he's targeting lovers' lanes, he is targeting people who are by themselves, a couple that is by themselves, rather. So then the Zodiac has to do something different, also to evade the authorities, because they think this guy is targeting men and women who are together. If he wants to keep committing crimes, these types of criminal masterwork thrill kills, for lack of a better term, what is he going to do? He's going to target a taxi driver. And it's possible that that was the reason for all of these deviations, is that he's simply thinking, they're going to be watching these areas, so I'm going to commit a crime in a different way because they won't suspect it. Being one step ahead of the game, and I don't think that's that outrageous of a claim. Alright, moving on to our next one. I'm sure that some people would want to hear about how the Zodiac Killer hoax theory, put forward by Thomas Henry Horn, could be incorporated into any of this. And in that one, there is no Zodiac Killer. There's no, official Zodiac Killer. Or how about this? There are different killers. It's a multiple killers theory, but one person is taking credit for crimes that he did not commit. Well, how would that fit into the Stein shooting, which states that a piece of Paul Stein's shirt was mailed in after the shooting took place to prove that the Zodiac Killer did in fact do that? This is a two-parter that we're going to have in response to this. And the first comment comes to us from Pedro Fernandez on the episode AMA, Zodiac, and All Things True Crime, Part 1, who says, having spent almost a decade with the San Francisco Police Department, I should put this in all caps because it's so preposterous. Nobody broke into the San Francisco Police Department evidence room and procured a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. And the follow-up to that was written by Tom Voigt, who says, according to the source of that nonsense, meaning Thomas Henry Horn, breaking in wouldn't have been necessary since the police didn't lock the doors. Anyone who believes this nonsense must be a moron. Now this is about a very particular angle in the Zodiac hoax theory, that the piece of Paul Stein's shirt was made available to the letter writer because Robert Graysmith stole it. Robert Graysmith is an active participant in the hoax theory, although if you listen to any of the interviews with Thomas Henry Horn, he will say one phrase usually. Excuse me. He will say, I can prove Hal Snook wrote the letters, his suspect for that part of it, but can I prove that Robert Graysmith was an active participant? No. And when I did the episode, Tom Voigt, on the Zodiac hoax theory, most of his challenges were involving Robert Graysmith as an active participant. Does the hoax theory require Graysmith as an active participant? Absolutely not. And you can hear the book discussion on the myth of the Zodiac Killer here on this channel. Thomas Henry Horn is also launching a new version of the Stones Unturned podcast. That's his show. But I wanted to address these two comments because that is not a central claim of the hoax theory. And Thomas Henry Horn also looks at other people who could have obtained that piece of Paul Stein's shirt. Out of all the Zodiac Killer crimes, he accuses Hal Snook of writing letters taking credit for them, but also Hal Snook has been accused of committing the murder of Paul Stein. And this mostly relates to his facial similarities to the composite after the Stein shooting. Okay, but Thomas Henry Horn is also going to reveal a new suspect in the murder of Paul Stein. He's promoting this, saying that he has cracked the murder of Paul Stein, and I I even asked him privately, "Kay, can you fill me in a little bit? I'm on the edge of my seat. What's going on with this?" And he did not. I can't tell you anything about that, even if I wanted to, because I do not know yet, but I'm going to be following what he has to say about the murder of Paul Stein and see what's going on. But the other suspect for obtaining the piece of Paul Stein's shirt is a journalist named Keith Power, who would have had access to the Hall of Evidence under the guise of being the press, or in fact actually being the press. Robert Graysmith, okay, production assistant, editorial cartoonist. I completely follow you guys when you say that it's highly unlikely that Robert Graysmith stole a piece of Paul Stein's shirt and either provided it to the letter writer or did something, some way, somehow, to get this to Hal Snook to mail in the letters. I completely follow that because as a reader, as someone who has just read the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, I have to agree with Thomas Henry Horn. I don't believe he's proven that Robert Graysmith was an active participant. I can follow his narrative in mostly a sequential fashion. Okay, this happened and then that happened. Or the reasons why there are so many inaccuracies in Robert Graysmith's 1986 book Zodiac. I can comprehend what he is saying, but I am not convinced at all that Graysmith was an active participant in the Stein shooting, but I do agree that it's highly unlikely that a private citizen who was not a member of the press would have been able to steal a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to this first half here, and please stay tuned because we're going to continue our discussion on the murder of Paul Stein, as well as how it is connected to the rest of the Zodiac Killer mystery. Please stay tuned and back right after this.
You are listening to Black Box Online Radio.
This show is brought to you by TeeSpring. Feel free to check out the merchandise. Almost all sizes and colors are listed.
Black Box Online Radio.
And remember YouTube Premium. You can download the show, take it on the go, anywhere and anyhow.
Please like and subscribe. Grazie mille.
Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. I just have one final thing about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory and in relation to Paul Stein, and that is that when I did my first episode on the Zodiac hoax theory, there was no Zodiac Killer is what it's called, I had no idea who Thomas Henry Horn was. I didn't know that this was an established thing. What I said very clearly in that episode was people were leaving very extended comments in the sections here on YouTube, just responding to my episodes on the channel. They're trying to tell me, "Hey, dude from BlackBoxOnlineRadio, there was no Zodiac Killer." And I pulled up an episode from 2019 on the murder of Paul Stein, just to read off some of your questions and comments. And I swear to you that these are true, because this one comes to us from someone named David Marskell, Marskell, hope I said that right, David Marskell, who said, "The biggest problem with the Zodiac Killer is there was no such person. It's a myth. Started and perpetuated by the San Francisco Chronicle. There is no evidence either that a large swatch of Stein's shirt was missing at the crime scene. It's the only thing that connects the Zodiac to the Stein murder. Not a note of it, nothing. What Zodiac had a scissor with him and cut out a perfect rectangle? It wasn't until they received the pieces of that shirt that anyone thought, oh my god, it's the Zodiac again. I mean, the murder of Paul Stein wouldn't be famous if it weren't for the Zodiac letters. Many people would have believed that it was just a taxi cab robbery gone wrong. And in Paul Stein's wallet was stolen, so I've always said that it's not just staged. It was a real taxi cab robbery. No one noticed that he was undressed at the morgue either. Either a reporter or a cop or someone mailed in those to keep the Zodiac story alive." Whoa, now hold on there a second. I mean, how do you have definitive certainty that that's what happened? Also, don't forget, Charles Manson had stolen all of the Zodiac's press 2 months earlier. The Zodiac myth had to be kept alive in order to sell newspapers, which is the object of a newspaper business in the first place. The crimes were separate. Sure, someone wrote letters, but there's zero evidence the author killed anybody. Zero. Anybody living at the time knew this. And our next one, my response was, "Hey, hi, nice comment, But why do you say the Chronicle specifically fabricated the story, and why are they the origin of this? I mean, I just wanted to be very clear. Was I was being genuine when I said people are just sending me these comments, and it isn't. This is another one from David Marskell, who says, "Let's put it simply. Well over 100 years ago, Mark Twain said, 'If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed.' Intelligent people don't argue with that sentiment. You have to accept that it's a given. If you stop reading it now. Fact, 150 years ago, during the Jack the Ripper spree, news agencies were receiving literally hundreds of confession letters. Newspapers were just coming into prominence with a worldwide audience, remembering that the object of any business is to earn money. Those killings were absolute gold to them. There were many murders in Whitechapel during that period, but the Ripper murders captured the imagination of the readers." Well, not exactly. With Jack the Ripper, there is an enormous difference between the Ripper and the Zodiac, and you can hear a full, extended episode on this channel simply called that, Jack the Ripper versus the Zodiac Killer, or it's actually the Zodiac Killer versus Jack the Ripper, come to think. The Ripper was more about the mutilations. That's why the murder of Long Liz Stride first occurs in the early AM hours of, what was that day again? I want to say August 31st, but I'm really not an expert on the Ripperology and so on. But the murder of Long Liz Stride and the murder of Catherine Eddowes took place on the same night, and they actually believe that the murder of Long Liz Stride was interrupted, and that this person, whoever he was, thought that he couldn't commit the mutilations, so then he had to find a different target, a different victim. I'm not 100% convinced of that, but that is something that has been pointed out. So, the only thing that I would say that is completely accepted among everyone is that victims were mutilated, and you can look at the crime scene photos for yourself on any of the Jack the Ripper websites as well as Google Images. But that is something, though, that is quite different about the Zodiac Killer, and that is that the Zodiac is not about contact with the victims. The Zodiac is more about just writing the letters. And this comment from this comment here from David continues on for a while, but I think you can get the idea there that David is a believer of the hoax theory, although it really is quite hard to imagine that the Chronicle was behind all this. When I read that stuff the first time, just hearing from various people like David in the comments section, I was like, what on earth are you talking about? That the San Francisco Chronicle created the Zodiac Killer? This whole idea that there was no Zodiac Killer? Of course there was a Zodiac Killer. But then I began to understand a little bit more, and at the very least, I can follow the narrative. I didn't say that I agree with it. I said I can follow the narrative, though. But about Charles Manson stealing the Zodiac's press, on one of the Stein episodes here on this channel, Colonel Reb has addressed that and says, why didn't he take credit for the Manson murders or the Patty Hearst kidnapping if he wanted fame? And I totally misread that one because it says, why didn't he take credit for the Manson murders or the Patty Hearst kidnapping and shit if he wanted fame? I guess my brain censored out the curse word. I mean, that's a good thing for a brain to do, sort of. But Colonel Rib, thank you for that comment. So this whole thing about Charles Manson stealing the Zodiac Killer's press, well, not exactly. I mean, the Zodiac seems to have made somewhat of a splash in after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and people were definitely on the lookout. The FBI was also getting involved because of the extortion charges that were brought up by the Vallejo Times-Herald. And these two things are happening at the same time. That's completely understood. Firstly, maybe Howard Davis is completely correct and there is a Zodiac Manson connection. Or why didn't he take credit for the Manson murders? Now, it's possible that the Zodiac Killer did say that he was going to go on a kill rampage, and there was some type of connection there. And that was actually referring to Charles Manson's Helter Skelter, or at the very least, stealing opportunities for media coverage. But it could also be that the Zodiac wants to focus on the Bay Area. The Zodiac Killer was very, very general about crimes that took place outside of the Bay Area. After the Lake Herman Road murders, you have somebody saying, okay, I'm going to state some facts that only I and the police know, and after Blue Rock Springs as well, because, as I said, 2 crimes are addressed in a single letter. So, I will state some facts that only I and the police know, and then the Zodiac is also talking about the Stein murder very clearly, sending in a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. Lake Berryessa has its own set of writing on the car door, so I mean, I think that that's the message that was mailed in. Very, very definitive connections. If this guy wanted fame, well, I think the Zodiac wanted to mostly attribute his crimes to the San Francisco Bay Area, because when it comes to the Riverside murder of Sherry Jo Bates on October 30th of 1966, the Zodiac doesn't even directly take credit for it. He says in one letter, oh yeah, you're learning about my Riverside work, this is in quotations now, my Riverside work, but you're only getting the easy ones, there are a hell of a lot more down there. So that's why I'm not convinced that the Zodiac Killer had anything to do with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Now, I think it's also important to address some of the reasons why there are these differences in the Zodiac crimes. And I mean, like you heard that comment from David there about how, hey, this is just a hoax that is perpetuated by the San Francisco Chronicle. Obviously, he's read the Great Zodiac Killer hoax series or the Myth of the Zodiac Killer. But why are there these differences? And many people believe in a single perpetrator. They think one person committed these crimes, and there are differences because of the connections to art, literature, music, and math. And you have one person who is trying to create a criminal masterpiece filled with mathematical signatures and signatures associated with literature, paying tribute to the opera The Mikado, paying tribute to T.S. Eliot's poem The Wasteland. And when I reviewed the videos from Skating Crow Productions, it states very clearly that in The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, there's a line that says, leaving a taxi, throbbing and waiting. And the woman who works on Skating Crow Productions, who's behind that channel, believes that all of the artwork on the Halloween card, or most of it anyway, is attributed to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. All of these references to literature mean that the crimes that the Zodiac committed were not arbitrary. It's not as simple as some person is just targeting lovers' lanes. Someone is just waiting for the opportune moment to kill people and brag about it. No, it has specific meaning. And one of the best examples of this is the Lake Berryessa stabbing that took place on September 27th of 1969. You can hear countless people talk about this. Drew Beeson, Richard Grinnell. They say if the Zodiac simply just wanted to commit a crime, he could have worn a scarf around his face or a ski mask or something. He put work and effort into the costume at Lake Berryessa because it had meaning to him. So you would have to think that there's a certain amount of planning that would have gone into all of these crimes because it's about creating a criminal masterpiece. I mean, theoretically, I don't know everything, but this gets us all away from these hoax theories and looks at a more solid single perpetrator theory. And I think it's important, though, to talk about the hoax theory in regards to the murder of Paul Stein, because after the murder of Paul Stein, it's the only time that the piece of the shirt is mailed in. I mean, not from David Faraday, not from Brian Hartnell, not from Mike Mageau. There's also a point, though, in terms of comparing Jack the Ripper to the Zodiac Killer. When I pulled up Nina Soren's channel to learn more about the Ripper victims, that was the first video that I watched in preparation for that Zodiac Killer versus Jack the Ripper series that I did, or just 2 videos actually. And it was all about how not only was Catherine Eddowes, that victim, mutilated in 1888, a piece of her skirt was cut off, and instantly I thought of the murder of Paul Stein. I was like, okay, this guy is either paying tribute to Jack the Ripper, or Jack the Ripper is some type of influence on his planning process. And that's why I've said very clearly, I believe the Zodiac Killer heavily studied Jack the Ripper, the Phantom Killer from Texarkana in 1946, as well as the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California. Going on to our next comment from Apex Prowler, who says, in my opinion, the Stein murder was a robbery gone bad and a copycat taking the gauntlet because of all the publicity. All the other murders have the same method of operation. Couples to cover up for the upcoming murder of Darlene Ferrin, who was into some shady things. Maybe she was about to turn on the shooter. Interesting nonetheless. Salute. Okay, thank you, Apex Prowler. Well, a copycat, then someone must have been pretty good at forging the Zodiac Killer's handwriting. I mean, a piece of Paul Stine shirt was connected to the Melvin Belli letter, which to this day, I still am not convinced that the actual Zodiac Killer wrote the Melvin Belli letter, only because of the differences in penmanship. If that were the only one that contained a piece of Paul Stine's shirt, I would follow you completely, but, it does appear that someone made a very good attempt to show that all of these things were committed by one person. So, I'm not quite sure that I could accept that the murder of Paul Stine was done by a copycat. Lake Berryessa is a much easier crime to attribute to a copycat killer. But it's a good comment all the same, because it talks about how Darlene Ferrin could be the center of everything. Darlene could be the epicenter, and this is at Blue Rock Springs, and that a series of additional murders were committed to make it confusing, to confuse the authorities, if you will. So, I've talked about this theory before on the channel, and somebody pointed out, I think it was Jerry B, who said that's another theory from the Jack the Ripper mystery, and that involves the final Ripper victim. That was Mary Kelly, right? I'm not an expert on the Ripper, but I would hope to be one day. That Mary Kelly is the center of this all because she was either married to or fathered or mothered an illegitimate child to someone in the royal family, and they wanted to get rid of her, so they committed a series of unconnected, unrelated murders, or maybe the victims were related, and then it was once again to confuse the authorities, but also, in that theory, to confuse the press. And maybe David's comment that we read off was simply the press were the ones who were intended to be confused so they wouldn't put out information to the general public, which could be easily solved. I'm just grabbing at straws with that, and I want to be 100% clear. That's just coming out of thin air. That is true crime blabbin', that new expression that we now use on this channel. But, I can't find the exact comment, but I know it's from Rick H., so giving a shout out to YouTube user Rick H., who was talking about Gareth Penn and his connections to the murder of Paul Stine. Gareth Penn is a researcher who went on to become a suspect. He wrote a book called Time 17, but as he becomes a suspect, you'll find that he's much more fascinating to deal with as a person of interest in the Zodiac Killer mystery, as opposed to a true crime author. And Rick H. first pointed out that, if you look at Gareth Penn's theory, it involves the word radian, or radians, plural, the angle of 57.29 degrees. One arm of the angle goes to Blue Rock Springs, and one arm goes to Presidio Heights, where Paul Stine was murdered. And the word Springs ends in G and S, and then the word Presidio begins with P, or even the Paul Stine murder. Paul Stine's name begins with P, GSP. And Gareth Penn's initials are Gareth Sewell Penn, and he's almost possibly the researcher hiding in plain sight. Now, I've been on somewhat of a Gareth Penn kick recently, where that theory has just been rekindled with me a little bit. It's because of something that I read in Time 17 recently when I was going over some things for the murder of Joan Webster, and there's been a weekly segment that's coming out on the murder of Joan Webster. There are at least 5 episodes out now, so now's a great time to subscribe to the channel to follow along with all of these new developments in the Joan Webster case. I correspond regularly with Joan Webster's sister-in-law, Eve Carson. I've also contacted the assistant district attorney who was working in the 1980s, and a lot of things have come out about Joan Webster recently here on this channel. But if you look at Gareth Penn's theory, first you have the Zodiac Killer at Lake Herman Road. Really, it's Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside. Then you have Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, the Lake Berryessa stabbing. The murder of Paul Stine is different when you have added layers of criminal versatility, especially the Lake Berryessa stabbing, especially the murder of Paul Stein. Someone's not only sneaking up on people in parked cars. Firstly, someone is wearing a costume and stabbing people. Secondarily, someone is riding in the car with Paul Stein. And the next thing that I read from Gareth Penn, with the murder of Joan Webster in 1981, the Zodiac Killer is now driving the car himself. I kid thee not. Because many people believe that Joan Webster was abducted by someone running an illegal taxi cab, a black taxi, a gypsy taxi, and that person lured Joan Webster into the taxi after leaving Boston Logan Airport on November 28, 1981. And then she was taken very close to the airport, actually, to a place near Chabaco Lake in Boston, Massachusetts, heading toward Lynn, Massachusetts, and she was murdered and her remains were buried in the ground. That's why Gareth Penn wrote in his book Time 17 that he believed that the Zodiac wanted to commit a final crime and the murder victim needed to be hidden, an added layer of criminal versatility. And I follow absolutely everything that he is saying once again. But, first that turns Gareth Penn into a suspect himself, and you can hear more about that on the Zodiac Killer Insight series, that YouTube channel that is available here, as well as the stuff that Ray Grant has online. He has lots to say about Gareth Penn, as well as Michael O'Hare and two other participants in that angle. But there's just something about that is so perplexing to me. This angle of how the Zodiac is not only getting closer to the victims, as many other theorists point out, but with the Joan Webster murder, that the Zodiac is now driving the taxi to a location where the victim must be murdered. Something about that just stands out to me, and not in a good way. And the final comment to read off here is from Mike M., who says, "The killer did take Paul Stein's wallet and keys, which makes me think the shirt was cut elsewhere. Nobody seems to know when it was first noticed that the shirt was cut. I can't believe that it was impossible to cut a near-perfect rectangle piece of shirt from a body that was slumped over and in a confined space. Why would the killer delay his getaway and risk getting caught? If it was the Zodiac, then he could have sent in the wallet or keys as proof. Also, the Zodiac didn't take souvenirs from the other victims." As far as souvenirs go, we did point out that it could be paying homage to Jack the Ripper by cutting off the piece of the shirt, or maybe even mailing some other items, as we said, similar to the murder of Catherine Eddowes. But the Zodiac Killer did take Paul Stein's keys and wallet. Well, I think Tom Voigt has addressed this about the cutting of the shirt, and that it wouldn't have seemed that abnormal for someone to have had their shirt in an odd way, or perhaps when the authorities first arrived, they simply thought that his shirt was just opened and like it was like unbuttoned, or it was just like that, an unbuttoned shirt, and they wouldn't have thought twice if a piece had been missing from it, especially as you said that Paul Stein's body was slumped over when they first would have arrived. Why would the killer delay himself cutting off the piece of Paul Stein's shirt? Well, I haven't mentioned it in this episode, but it's been addressed many times. Some people believe that the Lake Berryessa stabbing was a copycat, so this guy, the Zodiac Killer, wanted to prove that it was actually him. Or it could be just to show a different layer of criminal versatility, act like I can do some other things, but it was one of my first observations about this back in 2019. The Zodiac Killer didn't take trophies. I completely agree with you, until the murder of Paul Stein. Granted, the Zodiac Killer would have had the Lake Berryessa hood, which he would have left with. That is quite similar to a trophy, but it's his own creation, not something he stole from one of the victims. It really is quite odd. But these could be clues from literature, it could be clues from like musical theater, it could be something that has a particular meaning to the killer, and that's what you often find in the Zodiac Killer mystery, that these actions are not baseless. They aren't just random, they aren't just an inconsistent serial killer who wanted to commit crimes in a different way to confuse the authorities. It's then an inconsistent serial killer who wanted to commit crimes to confuse the authorities that also has a meaning. It also comes from magazines and comic books, as well as perhaps life experiences that this person had. All right, so what do you think happened with the murder of Paul Stein? Would you like to add something in? If you disagree with the Zodiac hoax theory, please challenge that. If you disagree with the Gareth Penn theory, please challenge that as well. And we haven't mentioned too many of the other suspects, because I wanted this to be about the theories, rather than looking at some of the other examples, such as Richard Gaikowski and all of his connections to Paul Stein. Gaikowski ran the switchboard on the street where Paul Stein lived, and it's possible that Gaik also attended Paul Stein's funeral. So those are just some things to bear in mind. And what do you have to say about the murder of Paul Stein? Please put anything you want in the comments section below. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. There's also a link to the Facebook page in the description box, and BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram. Okay.
This has been a production of Black Box Online Radio, hosted by Ned. Thanks for tuning in. Black Box Online Radio comes to you 3 times a week, covering serial killers and true crime, but any subject is fair game.
So see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.